Has this moment changed customer expectations forever? How can you transform at speed to build value that lasts? Are you reframing your future? Or is the future reframing you? In this time of change, find out how we can help you uncover opportunities now, next, and beyond.
Ne čekajte s uređenjem dječje sobe. Ugovorite gotovinski kredit u ZABI s fiksnom kamatnom stopom u samo par klikova putem M-kredita ili kod više od 1000 bankara koji su vam na raspolaganju na preko 100 lokacija.
ZABA, banka za sve što vam je važno.
Sada ugovorite gotovinski kredit još brže uz opciju M-kredit putem M-ZABA aplikacije. U par jednostavnih koraka bez dolaska u banku.
Has this moment changed customer expectations forever? How can you transform at speed to build value that lasts? Are you reframing your future? Or is the future reframing you? In this time of change, find out how we can help you uncover opportunities now, next, and beyond.
Ne čekajte s uređenjem dječje sobe. Ugovorite gotovinski kredit u ZABI s fiksnom kamatnom stopom u samo par klikova putem M-kredita ili kod više od 1000 bankara koji su vam na raspolaganju na preko 100 lokacija.
ZABA, banka za sve što vam je važno.
Sada ugovorite gotovinski kredit još brže uz opciju M-kredit putem M-ZABA aplikacije. U par jednostavnih koraka bez dolaska u banku.
Has this moment changed customer expectations forever? How can you transform at speed to build value that lasts? Are you reframing your future? Or is the future reframing you? In this time of change, find out how we can help you uncover opportunities now, next, and beyond.
Ne čekajte s uređenjem dječje sobe. Ugovorite gotovinski kredit u ZABI s fiksnom kamatnom stopom u samo par klikova putem M-kredita ili kod više od 1000 bankara koji su vam na raspolaganju na preko 100 lokacija.
ZABA, banka za sve što vam je važno.
Sada ugovorite gotovinski kredit još brže uz opciju M-kredit putem M-ZABA aplikacije. U par jednostavnih koraka bez dolaska u banku.
this moment changed customer expectations forever? How can you transform at speed to build value that lasts? Are you reframing your future? Or is the future reframing you? In this time of change, find out how we can help you uncover opportunities now, next, and beyond.
Ne čekajte s uređenjem dječje sobe. Ugovorite gotovinski kredit u ZABI s fiksnom kamatnom stopom u samo par klikova putem M-kredita ili kod više od 1000 bankara koji su vam na raspolaganju na preko 100 lokacija.
ZABA, banka za sve što vam je važno.
Sada ugovorite gotovinski kredit još brže uz opciju M-kredit putem M-ZABA aplikacije. U par jednostavnih koraka bez dolaska u banku.
Welcome to this Economist virtual event, whose subject is the EU Recovery and Resilience Fund and Croatia's transition. My name is Joan Hoey. I'm the Director for Europe at the Economist Intelligence Unit, and my co-chair today is Agnese Ortolani, who is a senior analyst and specialist in EU policy affairs at the Economist Intelligence Unit. So today we'll be discussing the recovery and growth outlook for Croatia after the COVID-19 pandemic. and we'll have a particular focus on the EU Recovery and Resilience Fund. The Prime Minister of Croatia will shortly give the official opening address. But Agnese, let me ask you to share the view from the Economist Intelligence Unit about the outlook for Croatia, just to set the scene for today's discussions. So the first question is, what is the situation right now in Croatia regarding the pandemic? Is the worst over?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Yes, so Croatia is currently suffering from a prolonged second wave of the coronavirus pandemic. And now the number of daily cases picked up since early March to around 900 daily new cases on average over the last week, but remains well below the peak in mid-December of around 3,600 cases per average. There are some social restrictions in place, including like a limited number of people gatherings and restrictions of border crossing and also special business operating hours. And these are set to remain in place until the end of March, and we expect most of them to be extended and to be lifted only by May, allowing economic activity to start rebounding by then. And furthermore, we don't expect a widespread rollout of COVID vaccine to around 70% of the population until the end of this year at the earliest, which will hamper the economic recovery.
Oh, thanks. So what do we expect in terms of the economic rebound in 2021? Obviously, Croatia had quite a deep recession in 2020. So what's on the horizon this year?
Yeah, exactly. So real GDP contracted by 8.4% last year, down from 2.9% in 2019. And we expect a growth of 4% this year, essentially on the back of a rebound in both domestic and foreign demand. But still, domestic demand will remain subdued in the early months of this year, as some restriction, as I just said, will remain in place. But then a gradual reopening of the economy will provide a boost to consumption and investment, especially in the second half of the year. The recovery this year will only be partial as the tourism sector continue to suffer, and the rebound will also largely depend on the spread of the coronavirus, on the vaccination dynamics, and in particular potential travel restrictions as well, that they might impact the tourism sector, which is an important driver of Croatia's economy. And the relative weak performance this year is also linked to the fact that Croatia is strong link with the Eurozone. And additionally, we don't expect the EU recovery funds to materialize until early this year or early 2022, which will further hold back the economic recovery.
Okay, so in terms of the funds, and of course, Croatia is a big recipient here of the EU recovery funds. I believe that 22 billion euros is coming Croatia's way potentially in terms of development funds in 2021 to 2027. So you're saying that we shouldn't expect to see the benefits of that really this year, or at least not until later this year. But what about over the medium term? What impact do you think these funds will have?
Well, over the medium term, the potential boost to the economy from the EU recovery funds is considerable, as Croatia, as you said, is among the biggest beneficiaries, net beneficiary, especially of EU funding as a share of GDP in 2021-2027. So Croatia, the EU funding for Croatia is set to roughly double over the next budget period to about over 22 billion euros. So the regular EU budget will be supplemented by the post-pandemic recovery fund. So Croatia is set to receive over 6 billion in net direct fiscal transfers, and the EU funded like a public investment program could increase potential growth considerably. But then its effectiveness will depend on the country's absorption capacity and also whether the fund is directed towards productive investment and activities.
Okay, thanks. Well, that's very useful. I've received a message that the Prime Minister is running a little late. So I think that gives us an opportunity, Agnese, to carry on our conversation, and we'll wait for the Prime Minister to join us to give the official address. So, I mean, just following up a few points from what you've just said, I think the Croatia is in the same position, obviously, as many others in the region, and a lot of what happens this year is contingent on the vaccine rollout. So maybe we can talk a little bit about what's happening with that, and indeed what's gone wrong, it seems, in the EU, where we were expecting. Some people were expecting a much faster rollout. So the EU seems to have run into all sorts of problems with the rollout. Can you just maybe give us a kind of recap of what's happened so far and what our expectation is for the remainder of the year?
Yes. So essentially, what happens in the rest of Europe, and especially in the Eurozone, is very important for Croatia's economy. As we know, like Croatia's main trade partner, for instance, is Italy, who is currently like suffering from a third wave of the pandemic. And as you said, the risk now with the rollout of the vaccine in the Eurozone in particular is that it has been particularly slow, which means that now most countries such as France and Italy, they are struggling to contain this new spike in cases because of the essentially the vaccination pace has been very slow so far. This has been due to a combination of reasons. Of course, the centralized procurement system of the European Union hasn't helped and has delayed quite substantially. But then we had some supply issues, especially in the first month of the year, which meant that several countries had to stop the rollout of several vaccines. And then we also had some like political decisions that had been taken around, for example, the rollout of the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine, and a combination of this, and also linked with some bottlenecks in terms of the distributions in several countries, and also delays in terms of the elaboration of the vaccine strategies, is also the rollout, as could essentially Europe to be most countries in the EU to be particularly slow, especially compared to the UK and the US. And this overall is probably one of the biggest risks that we see for the growth outlook in the Eurozone this year, as especially the country do not manage to hit the target of vaccinated around 70% of the population by the end of the summer. This is going to present serious risk for the autumn, when normally with the colder temperature, so we might see another spike in cases if the rollout hasn't proceeded as expected. And if we consider the current numbers of the rollout of vaccines, especially in countries like Italy, France, but even Germany, essentially all these countries will have to vaccinate 3 times what they are doing today to hit the targets by the end of the year. We don't believe this is impossible because, of course, most of the supplies, we expect a spike in supplies in the second quarter of the year, but still it relies a lot on the distribution mechanism as well, on vaccine skepticism as a risk in countries like France, for instance. And so it is definitely one of the most serious risks to the growth outlook in the Eurozone this year.
Well, thanks very much for that, Agnese. And I understand that the Prime Minister has been able to join us now, so we can begin with the official opening of the event. And I would like to introduce our guest of honor and our keynote speaker, Andrej Plenković, the Prime Minister of the Republic of Croatia. Welcome, Prime Minister, and over to you. Thank you very much for joining us. Do we have sound for the Prime Minister? Because I am not hearing. I'm not hearing the sound.
Is everything okay now?
Yeah, we can hear you now, Prime Minister. Thank you. We can hear you.
There was some sort of a technical detail. Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for inviting me to this conference, the Economist and Hazlis and Rivas conference on the EU recovery and the Resilience Fund and Croatia's transition. Good morning to you, Madame Hoy, Madame Ortolani, to all the participants that will during the morning and later on in the program discuss various aspects of this new opportunities as we see them for the member states of the European Union, but also for Croatia. First of all, I would like to say that this year has really been, that is now behind us, more than a challenging year for Croatia. It has had two major complex issues to deal with for the government, for the population, for the entire society. First one is, of course, just as anybody else, we were faced with the COVID-19 pandemic that has started in Croatia at the end of February last year and has since not abandoned us. The second context, which was a little bit more Croatia's differencia specifica compared to the other countries, was that we were hit by two devastating earthquakes, one exactly a year ago here in the capital Zagreb, and another one in the region of Banovina, which is just southeast of Zagreb. And the entire damage of these two very strong earthquakes is estimated to around 130 million kunas, and it is really a huge damage for us, which represents a challenge for the physical reconstruction, not only the economic recovery awaiting us. When it comes to the COVID-19, after the second wave, which was pretty strong during November and December, we have imposed restrictive measures which have subdued the dynamic of the pandemic, and we are now ranking among those in the European Union with the lowest contagion numbers, incidents per week or per 2 weeks. But however, we see the rise in last couple of weeks, just as everybody else, especially in the countries around Croatia, and this requires vigilance. This requires a very careful and calibrated approach for the different measures that we are aiming to adopt in order to sustain the pandemic. Croatia has had two major lines on the epidemiological measures so far. One, we never imposed a complete lockdown, and second, we never opted for a curfew. So there was no curfew and no complete lockdown. In reality, that means that we were trying to protect the economy, to protect the work, to protect the schooling system, and try to establish as much as possible a life as we once knew it. That means that Croatia never completely closed down the cultural sites or events such as museums, cinemas, theaters. We are not obliged to wear masks in public, outdoors, and this has helped a little bit, I think, to alleviate the pressures within the society compared to some other countries who have had more severe measures. As of 1st of March, we have reopened the terraces in restaurants and bars, and that has also a little bit helped the atmosphere in the society. But however, we need to remain very serious about the pandemic. The second point is the vaccination, something you mentioned in your introductory talk. Just as everybody else, we are struggling to get enough vaccines in order to undertake as much as vaccination process before the summer. Currently, Croatia has vaccinated 9.3% of our adult population. These numbers are increasing on a daily basis. We are one of those countries that ordered more AstraZeneca vaccines at the beginning than other pharmaceutical companies' vaccines, and that has clearly slowed down the process and the pace of vaccination because of these delays in production and deliveries. But we are now trying to find different ways in order to catch up for the delivery of those vaccines that we are currently lacking. Another element which is important for you to hear from me is to understand the overall economic situation. Croatia's GDP fell in 2020 8.4%, just behind Spain, Greece, and Malta, who had a bigger fall of the GDP. But according to our own estimates, according to the estimates of the European Commission, we expect a significant recovery, and the growth forecast is 5.3% in 2021. So we should be among the top 3 performing countries with the highest GDP growth during this year, together with Spain and France. Our tourist season last year was relatively okay when we look at the other countries in the Mediterranean. The tourist overnights was 55% lower than in 2019. This was the record-breaking year for the Croatian tourism. But these numbers enabled us to have a slightly better tourist season than the other countries. We have had a strong policy of support to the private sector in order to keep the jobs for our citizens in the private sector. It was a massive program that was organized by the Ministry of Labor and our Institute for Employment, meaning that the state stepped in and paid the salaries for the employees in the private sector. It covered more than 650,000 people, more than 100,000 businesses. It was a quick and strong measure that has basically enabled us to be 1 year after the start of the crisis, more or less the same numbers of those who are employed and those who are unemployed. And we also helped our businesses with liquidity in order to bridge these difficult times that we were all facing over the past 12 months. In this, we combined a European Union, different sources, different funds, the state budget. We managed to find adequate financing both at the domestic financial market, the international financial markets, good cooperation with pension funds, with the Croatian Central Bank, with the European Central Bank. And I would say that financially, we are investment credit rating at the level of investment rating. Even today, as we speak, last night, Standard & Poor's reconfirmed Croatia's investment rating, so investment grade. So I think from that point of view, we really did the maximum that we could. When it comes to the recovery and resilience plan, first, to see a bit of a context, how we put this document and the work that has been invested in it in the wider sense of what we have as strategic documents. My main objective as the Prime Minister was to streamline the work of the side ministries in order to have the National Recovery and Resilience Plan fully fitting with the National Development Strategy of Croatia, which was adopted by the Croatian Parliament in January. This is a 10-year development strategy, 2021-2030. Second, that it fits fully with the new government program. You will know that we had parliamentary elections back on the 5th of July, and Croatia, as ruling party, my party, Croatian Democratic Union, had a convincing win, and this is our second mandate, so we have a lot of continuity. The third element was that everything fits within the context of the National Reform Program, and of course, with the action plan of so-called post-commitments after we joined the exchange rate mechanism 2 on the 10th of July last year. So these four elements, together with the classical country-specific recommendations that the European Commission has for every single member state, were guiding lines on how we should structure our national program for the recovery and resilience. What is the tactics? Just as most of the EU member states, our approach is first to agree on the part of the grants of the National Recovery and Resilience Plan. I will remind you, it is 6.3 billion euros in the form of grants, which is around 12% of Croatia's GDP. This is more than any other EU member state comparatively. This is something I personally advocated during the negotiations at the European Council in the course of last year. You will remember that Croatia in this semester last year was also for the first time ever in the seat of the chair of the Council of the European Union. And in this context, we wanted to accentuate the fact that we were the newest member of the European Union. We joined in July 2013. Croatia, in the context of the, let's say, dependence quite a lot on the tourism sector, and of course, connecting sectors such as transport or hospitality sector, we suffered a lot from the COVID pandemic, and therefore we advocated all of these arguments in the context of the defining of the amounts for various countries. So first, the 6.3 billion euros loans. Then we will move, and we are working on it hard, to prepare Croatia's part of the next multi-annual financial framework. This is another 12.7 billion euros for Croatia. And then the third component is going back to the RRF, which is the EU Next Generation, where we have another 3.6 billion euros loans available. So this is the 1-2-3 plan, to put it very simply. How did we structure the plan? What are the areas where we see this part of the extraordinary EU financing that the leaders agreed upon last year is in 6 parts. First one is the economy, of course. This is the largest one, where the focus will be on the green transition of the Croatian economy, the energy transition, the water waste management, transport system, resilient tourism, and strengthening of the food supply chain. The other aspect is the public administration and justice, especially the reform in the justice administration system, state property system, better governance, and everything related to this area. Then, of course, the education, science, and research, which is extremely important. This is the real, I would say, systemic way to catch up with the global trends, with the fourth industrial revolution, with the competitiveness at the global and European level. The fourth one is the labor and the social protection. This is where we need strengthened both the legislation and measures that will create more jobs, especially the self-employment, and also ensure the social inclusion in the society through the adequate social protection. The fifth one is the healthcare system. This is this part of the Croatia's administration that is, I would say, overstretched over the last year and is always in difficulty of financing. This is where we do lack in a number of years behind us, I would say, a clear house in trying to reform the healthcare system so that it is more efficient, more accessible, but also that it creates less losses for the budget. Finally, the sixth component is the so-called initiative, which is related to the reconstruction of buildings. This is especially important to complement what we are doing through the EU Solidarity Fund and other various sources that we are negotiating with the EIB, with the EBRD, with the Council of Europe Development Bank, how to find funds that will enable a reconstruction of both public houses, but also the private housing, which was very, very much hit. We, of course, are trying to combine the number of reforms and the investment projects with the criteria that is on the table. Everybody is aware of them. This is the green and the digital transition, 37% of green, 20% of digital, and also to match everything that we are putting on paper with the so-called notion do no significant harm, which is, of course, related to the various environment protection criteria. In that respect, we are now in the phase that the next week we shall launch the process of the public consultations on this document. I think it's important that we hear the feedback of the various stakeholders. We will also, in the mid of April, have a consultative debate as an information point to the plenary of the Croatian Parliament. I very much advocate presentation of the European issues to the Croatian parliamentarians. For instance, after every single European Council, I go in front of the plenary and explain what was discussed, what was debated, in order to increase the awareness of both the political parties and actors, but also the Croatian public, what are the key issues on the European table. From that point of view, our initial agenda is to have the national plan for recovery and resilience adopted at the government session on the 29th of April, so as to be able to send it on time. That is this principal deadline, which is the end of April, that we agreed with the Commission how to send it. Final point is on the exchange rate mechanism 2 and the Eurozone. You are aware that Croatia has two major objectives when it comes to the EU. One is joining the Schengen area, and the second one is joining the Euro area. We are advancing on both of these objectives very clearly, concretely. 10 days ago, at the level of the Justice and Home Affairs ministers, there was a final evaluation by the European Commission on all the technical issues, and during the Portuguese presidency, this Commission report was adopted. Now we move on to more political field where we need to get the political support of our partners within the European Union to join the Schengen area, and this will be certainly one of the key elements on our political agenda in the contacts with our friends. The second point is the Eurozone. Here, not only that we have adopted the strategy for the adoption of Euro back in May 2018, we really were on time with everything prior to joining the exchange rate mechanism 2. We are on track with fulfilling the post-commitments by the March 2022 in the four major areas. This is especially the money laundering, everything that is related to the money laundering initiative and the legislation. The second one is the better governance in terms of public companies, in terms of general better governance in Croatia. The third one is, of course, improving the investment and the business climate in Croatia to have everything a little bit more predictable, stable when it comes to the legal and tax framework. And of course, the fourth element is general fight against corruption and the reform of judiciary, which is, I would say, a systemic issue that every single country, whether it is in the EU or outside of the EU, has to always have on mind. The timeline after the government has adopted the so-called convergence plan, so the plan to exchange the Croatian kuna for the euro. We have given ourselves 2 years for that exercise, and we shall be trying to fulfill the necessary criteria, the Maastricht criteria, when it comes to the budgetary deficit and the public debt. Before COVID-19 crisis, we were really on track to fill all the fiscal criteria. Now there is this general escape clause for the Stability and Growth Pact at the European level. We feel in a way covered by it because we are all in the same situation, and therefore we try to work hard to get back to those numbers which we proudly claimed in 2017, 2018, 19, where Croatia had either a balanced budget or a budgetary surplus. With the really rapidly diminishing public debt, and that has enabled us to really strengthen our reputation among the international financial markets and the institutions. So this is where we find ourselves today. I see this EU Next Generation really as a great move of the European Union. I think it is a gesture where the EU shows it's there for the member states, it's there for the European citizens, just as much Croats as anybody else. And I think we need to be agile. We need to be capable of using this extra opportunity which we have, because this is a generational opportunity in my view. When I look at the numbers for the next 10 years, we in principle have 9.6 billion euros from the EU Next Generation. We have 12.7 billion euros for the multi-annual financial framework. We have almost 1 billion euros coming from the EU funds for the reconstruction after the earthquakes. There is the REACT-EU mechanism, there is the Just Transition Fund. Plus, we need to spend in next 3 years 5 billion euros from the previous financial framework. So altogether, Croatia has in total available 30 billion euros for the recovery and resilience and the development, national development from 2020 to 2030. And I think this is the year where we should really definitely leave behind all of those transition from socialist economic system to the capitalism to market economy completely behind, and emphasize those economic sectors which will be really the drivers of our economic development and our competitiveness at European and global level. So a lot of good preparation work has been done. I think we have all the tools available. Now it's up to, of course, the government, but also all the other actors involved to seize the moment and make this fourth decade of Croatia's independence a truly consolidating decade. In economic terms, there is only one thing which is left for us, and that is economy in the year ahead of us, of course, along with the strengthening of our institutions. I thank you very much for this opportunity, and I'm sure that my ministers will, in the course of debate, offer more details in various sectors of reforms that are being planned or undertaken. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed, Prime Minister. We really appreciate that you took the time this morning to open this very important event, and your remarks are tremendously useful, and we will be looking at all of those issues that you raised in more detail throughout the day. So thanks very much again, and have a good day.
Thank you once again. Have a very good conference. You will excuse me, but there are a number of issues waiting in the next room.
Sure. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Okay, so thanks everybody who's joined us so far this morning. We're now going to start with our first panel of the day, and this panel is looking in more detail at the EU strategy for Europe's recovery and resilience. We'll be looking at the vision behind Next Generation EU from an EU perspective, but also again in more detail from the Croatian perspective. And we have an excellent panel. For those of you who may have just joined, my name's Joan Hoey. I'm the Director for Europe in the Country Analysis Division at the Economist Intelligence Unit. And my co-chair again today and for this panel is Agnese Ortolani, a senior analyst in my Europe team and a EU policy expert, and also provides a very good perspective, I think, on the discussions for Croatia, because Agnese covers Italy and Spain and other southern European countries. So let me introduce now our panel for this morning. We have three excellent speakers. The first speaker is Jeroen Dijsselbloem, chairman of the Dutch Safety Board and the former president of the Eurogroup. Celine Gauer, who is the head of the Recovery and Resilience Task Force, Recover, at the European Commission, and Zdravko Maric, the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance of the Republic of Croatia. I believe all our panelists are connected, and so without further ado, I'm going to hand over to our first speaker. Welcome, all of you, and let me ask Jeroen Dijsselbloem to start off with his remarks.
Good morning. Thank you, Joan. Thank you for the introduction. It's a great pleasure to be able to join you today. After having listened to the interesting speech by the Prime Minister going into the situation and the ambitions of Croatia, I will make a few more general remarks about the EU strategy and where we are. First of all, I think when you look back at the previous crisis, the financial crisis of 2008, Europe has acted so much more decisive, so much faster than last time. It's very, very different. Last time, the first 4 years was spent by internal fighting and debates about how Europe should react, whether there should be a common reaction, a joint approach. And it was only in 2012 when Mario Draghi in the summer said, we will do whatever it takes. Only a few weeks after the government leaders said, we will set up the banking union. And it was only at the end of that same year, 2012, when the ESM treaty became fully effective and the ESM joined in fighting the crisis. So it took 4 years effectively before there was a common Eurozone answer. This time it was very different. Already in March, the ECB introduced the pandemic program to enter into markets even more aggressively and offensively, supporting the economy. It was, I believe, in May when the first package of support came about, including 250 billion from the ESM, which, by the way, hasn't been used so far. 200 billion additional scope for the EIB, the investment bank, and 100 billion came from the European Commission to support countries with the program called SURE, which supports the income of people who are in threat of losing their jobs throughout the EU. So that was the first package already in March. And then in July, of course, the agreement came about regarding the Recovery and Resilience Fund. This has been a major breakthrough. When I think back on the difficult discussions we had on what joint responsibilities and joint instruments we should have, particularly in the Eurozone, this really is a breakthrough. 750 billion, part grants, part loans, but in particular the fact that it is financed by common debt, that the European Commission can take on debt to these numbers, really is a political breakthrough for Europe and in particular importance for the monetary union. Now, also the fact that the different member states have agreed to allow the Commission to work on getting the funds together through taxation. So a number of European taxation possibilities are on the table now, which were completely off limits, politically non-discussable, non-debatable in the past. So again, a breakthrough. What are the challenges ahead? we have to realize that the funds will only come available gradually, which is a great disadvantage in the current state of affairs. We would need to support the economy much faster, and I'm worried about the speed with which the RRF funds are becoming available. In fact, the SURE program, which I believe delivered 1 billion to Croatia, is much more direct and much more fast and really supports demand in a very direct way. And I believe it will be wise for the European countries and the European Commission to lengthen the SURE initiative and to expand it into this year and next, create a bigger power to support demand in our member states. And of course, to speed up where possible the process of getting the funds available from the restructuring fund. Other issues also remain is the fact that the Commission can now take on debt. Is this a structural issue or is it a one-off? Will it be done in the future in order to step in when there are crises, particularly for the Eurozone? This is, of course, an important question. The debate about having a fiscal capacity for the Eurozone long-term still hasn't been finally decided. Structural reforms are needed. Now, the national plans that are being put forward should address the structural reforms, but I'm slightly worried about the quality and the ambition of the structural reforms in different countries. Structural reforms are never very popular. National politicians always have a new election coming up, and I've experienced, for one, what these national elections can bring about. And yet we have to make Europe more competitive. We have to create a better business and investment climate. So work really needs to be done there. And finally, the big question is, how far does the stick of the ECB reach? There are still legal questions which will come back to us in the future regarding the mandate and the scope of the mandate of the ECB. So we cannot depend for a too long time so much on the ECB. And national politicians will have to step up to create a better business and investment climate in Europe. And that, I think, is a matter of great urgency, given the fact that the USA is showing a much stronger recovery right now than the Europeans. So speed has to pick up, funds need to come available as quickly as possible. And also at national level, we will need to have ambitious reforms. I'll stop here for now.
Okay, thank you very much, Jeroen. That's some very interesting remarks. I'm sure we're going to come back to some of those. Very interested in your suggestion about the extension and expansion of the SURE program, among other things. But let's turn now to our next panelist, Celine Gouwer, the head of Recover. Very interested to hear your perspective, which is at the core of this program, of course. Celine, over to you.
Thank you very much, and good morning to everyone. Big thanks also from my side to have the opportunity to discuss with you today. I think it's a crucial phase we are now entering with the finalization of the National Recovery and Resilience Plan, and a good moment to exchange. As was mentioned before by the Prime Minister and by Mr. Dijsselbloem, we really have a unique opportunity now to address the consequences of the pandemic, and not only to get out of the pandemic, but also to build the resilience of our economies and to make them more competitive. For Croatia, we have a particular magnitude of the challenge because, as was mentioned before, I think the amount, the absolute amount in absolute terms, but also in percentage of GDP is the highest in the EU. So it is a huge opportunity, but it is also a big challenge for Croatia. On the opportunity, as the green transition was mentioned seven times before, it is really the driver and a growth model that we want to have for the EU as a whole, and both the channeling of the expenditure towards climate-friendly investments and the compliance with the do no significant harm principle will be crucial in that respect. And why is that? Because as was said, we want to have learned from the financial crisis. What we saw in the financial crisis was that a lot of the investments went to unsustainable sectors and business models, and that they helped to recover, but they didn't help to make our economies more sustainable. And this is really one of the lessons we have learned, and why the Green Deal and the do no significant harm principle are so much at the core of the recovery plans that we see. Digital as well. I think if we've learned one thing, and this morning again, unfortunately, if we've learned one thing from the pandemic, is how connectivity and digitalization of all the economy are crucial for business continuity and also for competitiveness going forward. So that's also one key component that we see in all the national recovery and resilience plan, and Croatia will be no exception in that respect. But what is also essential is to build a resilience, and the resilience, if we look at economies like Croatia, will come from a number of factors, starting with the functioning of the labor market. The greater participation of all workers to the labor market, the older ones, the younger one who have been particularly hit by unemployment in these times of pandemic, but also the women. And the possibility to work longer and longer hours is one key challenge for the resilience of the economy, and this is a particular one for Croatia. And these measures will have to be enshrined in the plan. I think it's a legal requirement. The country-specific recommendations have to be observed, but it is also a must if we want the economies to be stronger going forward. Another particular challenge in terms of resilience for Croatia will be the diversification of the economy. So we saw how the sole focus on tourism has weakened the ability of Croatia to weather the crisis, and more diversification will be really important. And finally, in terms of reforms, the business climate and the functioning of the public administration will have to be seriously taken care of through the measures included in the plan if we want the whole thing to succeed. And that brings me actually to the challenges that are there for all member states, but in particular for Croatia. The plan will roll over 6 years, and planning for 6 years, we know this from experience, is a very difficult endeavor. Having a clear timeline and a clear content for all the reforms and the investment over such a long period of time is an objective challenge. That's true for the public investment, but that is also true for the private investment, which the Croatian Prime Minister recalled has to be at the center of the Croatian plan. Making sure that those investments are properly targeted, that they do reach really growth, and that they are that is money well spent, is a huge endeavor and has to be calibrated properly in the plan. The second and new challenge for Croatia is absorption. I think the fact that so much funding is coming to the economy is a good news, but is also a difficulty to absorb and make sure that they are not wasted, that they are well used, and that they do turn into jobs, into growth, and that they can be spent within the very short timeline of the facility. As you know, I think all the commitments will have to be made by 2023, and no payment will be made after 2026 under the facility. So the money will simply be lost if it hasn't been put to good use in the meantime. And to meet that challenge of absorption, I'm coming back to the public administration and to the justice system that will have to be deeply reformed to ensure that the economy can actually absorb those extra funds and opportunities for growth. That will also require from the government and from the whole society a very strong governance structure for the implementation of the investment and of the reforms. And that, of course, needs to rely on ownership, national ownership, and participation. That's why I'm welcoming very much the public consultation that is about to start, but also of a very strong steer from the central government and a very efficient territorial organization to make sure that the funds are not scattered or dispersed, but really well used. And finally, and that was also mentioned by the Prime Minister, but it is absolutely essential both for ERM2 and for the implementation of the plan, the fight against corruption and conflict of interest, and the existence of very robust system of audit and control for the implementation of the plans is an absolute must. All of those challenges will have to be met if we want the opportunity to materialize, and we all do want this. So it means that the timeline is daunting, really. I think to have all of these issues addressed and properly addressed in the plan before the end of April is really a challenge. But we are here to help from the European Commission and very determined and committed to make this a reality for Croatia as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed. So let's turn to our third panelist, Zdravko Maric, the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, and to hear the Croatian perspective. We're not hearing your sound at the moment, Mr. Maric. Maybe your mic is muted. Still not hearing the sound. Okay, we'll hold on a second while you get some help with that technical issue. Okay, maybe while we're waiting for Mr. Maric to connect, I'll just follow up with one quick question, and Mr. Maric can also reply to it as well once his sound is his connection is made. No, we still can't hear anything. And that question is just coming back to, I mean, it's something that's been emphasized already by both speakers so far, is on the absorption of these funds and the uses to which they're going to put. So my question is a pretty obvious one, but what basis do we have for thinking that these funds will be used well? Just looking at Croatia's track record in terms of absorption capacity, I believe it's in the region of 48%, something like this, historically. And also just in terms of, in general, the kind of track record of many countries in terms of not just absorbing amounts, that these are, pretty spectacular amounts of potential funding, but making sure that they're not wasted. How could, I mean, first of all, Mr. Dijsselbloem, what do you think? Are you skeptical about the degree to which this can actually work well? And Celine, what can the EU do to help here to make sure that some of the problems of the past are not repeated?
Yes,
Jeroen, do you want to start?
I think it is a real issue and a real threat to this approach. As I said, I'm very positive about the whole plan and the ambition and the support from the EU, but the absorption capacity of countries really is a threat. If I remember correctly, literally hundreds of billions of euros were left unspent or are still unleft spent from different funds and structural funds in Brussels because countries simply weren't able to effectively absorb them. So this is I remember this very well from the Greek crisis, where we put in a lot of effort to improve the absorption capacity of Greece in order to get investments back on the go again. This is a returning and revolving issue. I think the involvement of private parties can be helpful. So if there is a connect between the public and private investments, this is one way to improve the effectiveness, to really make it worthwhile for the economy, but also to improve the speed of rolling it out. I think the Commission has done quite a lot, and I'm sure that it has improved a lot since the last crisis, helping member states effectively implementing their plans.
Thanks. Salim, your view on this?
Yeah, no, thank you. I think that there are very significant differences between structural funds and the new instrument we are talking about, and maybe that is one part of the solution. I think here we have front-loaded a number of the things that normally slow down the spending of the fund. All the costing exercise that is happening to simply value the plans is happening at the beginning, and there will be no sort of detailed invoice checks and compliance checks afterwards. So it's a performance-based instrument based on milestones, based on targets, and not based on actual expenses undertaken by the member states, which means that the way the controls and checks at national level will be organized could be quicker. I think so. The administration itself of the fund could be part of solution, but it's only a small part of it. The second element is, as I mentioned before, I think the administrative reforms that have to come as part and parcel of the national recovery and reform plans. And these are really issues that we are looking at with each and every member state having these absorption challenges, and not only Croatia. So that involves permitting, that involves public procurement, that involves a one-stop shop for the administration, and that may also involve the organization of financial instruments, and then the involvement of business for the undertaking of the investments. So we're really looking at all of these different elements and trying to speed up. It is an opportunity because those reforms have been on the map for a long time by the member states, but here you can really have very concrete obligations to carry them on and very concrete milestones for their delivery. So hopefully this is going to really support the member states in their endeavor. And of course the work will not stop for us at the approval of the plan. I think we are geared for a number of years of really heavy support, both from the implementation of the fund directly and also from the technical support instrument that is available for the implementation of the funds, and which member states have already indicated they strongly intend to use in the coming years. So hopefully the combination of all of these elements will ensure that the money is well spent and spent on time. Thank you.
Thanks. That's very useful. I'm hoping that Zdravko Maric will be able to reconnect. I've been trying to reconnect. I have a message that he's been able to reconnect, so let's try again.
Do you have me? Do you hear me? Do you see me?
We do indeed. That's great to hear you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, and sorry for this inconvenience. Our apologies, but technical issues. Yesterday we tested the system, everything worked. Now we reconnected on the other iPad. So first and foremost, I would like to thank the economists for organizing this event and the conference, and of course to thank my distinguished fellow colleagues on this panel. Madame Gauer, thank you very much for your participation, and by saying that, thank you on behalf of the whole European Commission for the assistance providing us in last weeks and weeks ahead of us in the finalization of the document. Mr. Dijsselbloem, dear Jeroen, it's been a while. Very good to see you again. I'm glad to see you in a good shape. I heard both of your presentations, and it's not just a matter of my politeness, but I need to say that with predominant parts of your speeches and your presentations, I completely agree. And I will start by saying that, well, today is exactly 1 year since I had this privilege as at that time presidency of council and as a finance minister to I would say initiate a video conference of the finance ministers of the EU member states when we reached an agreement of using the full flexibility of the Stability and Growth Pact and thus giving to member states the opportunity to go further with providing fiscal incentives to their economies. And also by saying that, I would echo something that Jeroen just mentioned, comparison between this crisis, which is again unprecedented one, with the previous one. And I can say that both an European answer and I can say from the angle of Croatia, Croatian answer was much better, and that we managed to act something that I would characterize as adequately in terms of the measures, but also timely. We saw, and I think we all have a very clear experience of the previous crisis. If you are in a way a bit late, then the repercussions and consequences are much more, let's say, negative. In case of Croatia, just for the sake of comparison, and I hope that, I'm sure, not only hope, that this is definitely one lesson learned, very important lesson that we learned. In case of Croatia in the previous crisis, we have been recording negative GDP growth for 6 consecutive years, and it took us additional almost 5 years to reach level of pre-recession level of GDP. By saying that, I would say that I'm glad that we as authority, as the government, had the possibility to act, as I said, and adequately and immediately at the very beginning of the crisis. What ensured us was the fact that in the years before the COVID pandemic, we, I would say, conducted very prudent fiscal and monetary policy. And as opposed in the previous crisis, we had a very adequate mix of these two. Primarily important in the first place was the fiscal policy when we introduced the measures which were directly, let's say, linked and directed towards the private sector in order to gain and I would say secure jobs and employment. We recognized human lives and health as utmost important, I would say, goal and priority, but on the economic ground, equally important was and is protection of jobs and employment. By doing so and by having that set of measures, now a year after, despite the fact that pandemic is still underway, that the challenges are still present, I can say that from the angle of our labor market indicators, from our budget indicators, we can say that we managed to succeed in this, I would say, arena. But at the same time, as I said, challenges remain, and we need to be careful and not to make some kind of, let's call it a last moment mistake or some kind of turnover in order to, let's say, break everything apart. I'm very glad that European response was very good. As Jeroen mentioned, SURE program, I'm also very glad to hear that because Croatia was again leading a presidency when we have been, I would say, working under this program. Croatia as a member state already took 2 tranches of SURE program, and I would say in line with our original expectations, I would say exhausted the whole amount, but I'm glad to hear that there are remarks and there are some kind of suggestions that the program could also be prolonged. I think that it is a good one because it is linked towards exactly the same priority that I just described, and that is the security of jobs and employment. As regards the EU Next Generation, you heard Prime Minister Plenković, all the numbers, all the areas, all the priorities that he mentioned, and without any, I would say, need to repeat what he said, I would like just to follow up to his words that I'm personally, not only as a Vice Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, but as an economist, I am very glad that the whole composition of the package, particularly recovery and resilience facility, lies on two very important folds. On one hand, when we are talking about recovery, we are predominantly thinking about investments. Madam Gauer just very nicely mentioned, and I would say explained us that and private and public investments are more than welcome and needed, but adequate ones, efficient ones, the ones that will create and bring economic value in the future, in line, of course, with thresholds of green, digital, without significant harm and of these characteristics. But on the top of recovery and investments, I would specifically mention and stress the importance of resilience, and I would say slash reforms. This is something that is important for the individual member states, including Croatia, but of the whole European Union, because we all know that tomorrow will be again another kind of crisis. We don't have a crystal ball. We cannot predict when and in which specific area the crisis will hit us, but we need to be, let's say, prepared for this kind of event. And this crisis, I think, is again proving that it's not just a matter of how deep, strong, unprecedented crisis is, but it's also very matter how individual member states, European Union as a whole, is prepared and in what shape it comes and enters into this crisis. So weeks ahead of us, we will be working and finalizing the document. The document is important. We will be submitting it to the European Commission at the very end of April, as originally anticipated and promised. Government session 29th of April will be the one where we will be adopting the document. After that, valuation of Commission, European institutions, advanced 2021, but even more important out of all of these steps would be the implementation of the document and the absorption of the funds that are available. And this is something that we are very much focused. These funds are to be directed and used in a proper way for the adequate transformation of our economy and overall society to serve its purpose, recovery and resilience, and at the end of the day, to get us all out of the existing and current situation, with still, I would say, existing negative risks predominantly coming from the not clear and not full visibility of COVID-19 performance going forward. However, with a very clear attitude and approach that and health and human lives are to be protected, and of course in the economic sector, jobs and overall economic activity. Final remark before pausing and letting, of course, Q&A session is something that both the Prime Minister and my distinguished colleagues on the panel also stressed. You know very well that Croatia, in the mid of last year, joined ERM, entered ERM2. Just a brief remark that a year before that, so it was a mid-2019, when Croatia submitted the letter of its intention to join ERM2, where we pre-committed ourselves on fulfillment of 19 measures in 6 different fields in order to, let's say, improve the business environment, overall public administration functioning, state assets performance, judiciary, etc. Once pandemic hit us, like the whole globe, many have been expecting that we will be delaying in terms of us delivering these measures. That was not the case. We even delivered the measures in advance. As a result of that, European institutions, and we respect that highly, and member states, let's say, positively responded to our initiative and our willingness to join ERM2, where we are currently. and working very thoroughly despite pandemic and despite another event which I need also to stress. And yesterday was actually the unfortunate anniversary of the earthquake that hit Zagreb exactly a year ago. 10 seconds of earthquake, it will take us 10 years of rebuilding and reconstruction of the downtown of Zagreb. Unfortunately, in the meantime, we had another earthquake not far away from Zagreb in one area, which is unfortunately also economically least developed. I'm mentioning and COVID and earthquake. However, very strong message from our side is that despite these challenges that we are facing, we stand ready, fully committed in fulfilling our criteria, both of Maastricht and both of post-entry into ERM, because we see merits of joining and adopting euro much higher than potential costs. Merits and benefits are long-lasting as opposed to potential costs which are predominantly one-off. And final remark regarding Jeroen, since we have also one Croatian saying, once finance minister, always finance minister, I would echo to his remark that, of course, today, full fiscal policy is supposed to be directed and put in the function of economic recovery, growth, job protection. But of course, we must not neglect the fact that eventually we will be again very much focused on the sustainability of public finances. Croatia treats our public debt growth in 2020 as a one-off effect after 5 consecutive years of the decline trend of the public debt in GDP, and we expect already this year to be back on track. That's why I would stress that it's our responsibility to, let's say, balance between sometimes challenging and conflicted interests. However, in the midterm, again, employment recovery is of our utmost importance. Thank you very much. And once again, sorry for the inconvenience, but now I think we are all ready to receive questions and comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. So this session was originally intended to stop now at 10:10, but we'll extend it for 10 minutes because we started 10 minutes late. So we'll have a break at 10:20, that's Central European time. The break will be 5 minutes long, just for those who are following our discussions today, so that you know. And just to say also to our audience that you may submit questions through the streaming platform. And please, I encourage all of you to do so throughout the course of the day to submit your questions. So in the little time we have now available, 8 or 9 minutes, I wanted to give my colleague Agnese also an opportunity to ask some questions. One question I hope that you can come back to, Celine Gower, is the one about the short program and how feasible you think it would be your own suggestion that could be expanded and extended through this year and next year, given that it's worked so well, so efficiently. I'd be interested to hear your view on that. But let me hand over to Agnese, who I'm sure would like to pick up on some of the things that you've mentioned already in your opening remarks, all of you.
Yes, thank you, John, and thank you very much for your presentations. A question that I also have for probably all of you, but I think is something that Ms. Gower mentioned in her presentation, is because is the need to diversify the economy away from tourism. And given the impact that the COVID pandemic had on travel restrictions and the risk also to see an asymmetric recovery in Europe with tourism-dependent member states penalized essentially way more than the others. My question would be, from a government perspective, so for Minister Maric, what are the government priorities to diversify the Croatian economy? And to all of you more broadly, how does the Croatia growth model need to change? Thank you.
Okay, so let's hand back to our panelists to give their views on those questions. So, Joran, do you want to start with taking any of those, or indeed to pick up on anything that your co-panelists have said?
I think that one of the key challenges for Europe is still the meager, the slow potential growth we have. And again, this is setting us back if you compare to the recovery that is now taking place in the US. We are again slow, and we really need to use the funds that are now coming available to improve that potential growth. And I think one of the key issues, and the Commission was right to pinpoint it, is digitalization. For our economies to absorb new technology in a much quicker and efficient way, having the best digital infrastructure is key. It really makes a huge difference whether your country is equipped with a high level of digital infrastructure, also if you want to diversify your economy. So I think this is quite right, a big priority. I don't think it's possible to do that within 6 years, by the way. And I would hope that the Commission and the Council allow for those countries that are going to roll out big, ambitious plans for digitalization infrastructure. If needed, those countries should be given more time. But maybe that can be discussed in a few years' time. We still have some years to go. But these are, as the Commission knows, long-term investment plans. Build structure takes a long time. So that, I think, is a major priority, and I hope it will be in Croatia.
Thanks. I'm just going to throw in a question from the audience as well for you to think about. The question concerns the earthquake damages from the 2 earthquakes last year. Damages are estimated at 33% of GDP. And the questioner asks about, if we're talking about resilience, surely that has to include disaster relief, disaster risk reduction. And they're interested in knowing the views of the Croatian government and of the EU on how investments, public and private investments, might be directed towards earthquake resilient buildings and structures. So perhaps Mr. Maric can come back to that as well. But let me turn to Ms. Gower now.
No, thank you very much. A few points on diversification and on your last question on the earthquake. On diversification, I think there is a need. I think that was obvious from the current crisis, that if you only rely on or mostly rely on one source of growth, then you are vulnerable. They can be different sources and different ways of diversifying, and that's certainly something that the recovery plan should help doing. It doesn't mean, of course, that no support can be given to the tourism sector. I think the tourism sector needs to also digitalize and get greener and get more sustainable, and also diversify within the different types of offers that are proposed, but it is important not to rely only on that. In terms of the timeline for the implementation of the fund, I see it quite difficult to extend, at least seen from now. Maybe in a few years things will be different, but I doubt it a bit. What is, however, very important, in particular for Croatia, is to look at all the sources of funding in a consistent manner. And we said before that the ERF is a lot of money, but it's not the only money that is flowing from the EU to Croatia. And in particular for digitalization, I think how to use as well the structural funds, but also the centrally managed program like the Digital Europe program or Horizon would be a smart way of also spreading the support to the digitalization over time. So starting with what is mature and can be done or immediately now with the RF, and then relying on other sources of funding. And then finally, on the resilience to a natural disaster, and in particular to earthquake, of course, I think that can be very well addressed in the plan. Has to respect still the idea of more sustainability and more digitalization that is at the core of the facility. But there are obviously ways to do that and make sure that the facility is also contributing to the recovery, to the physical recovery of the country. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's over to Mr. Maric, and I'm afraid this is going to be the final comments from this panel because we are out of time, but there's a few questions there for you to answer on diversification and resilience regarding earthquakes, natural disasters, and so on.
I will do my best to answer both of these angles because these are quite important. Well, the crisis, this one also showed that there is a plenty of good and healthy part of our economy struggling, being resilient, and of course already being on the path of not only recovery but of growth. But on the top of that, I would stress the importance of the, let's say, incomers, new I would say, I would even use this term, new kids on the block, which means new digital, predominantly digital and IT sector companies, which are like many global examples, literally started from the garage, and today they are already quite known, not only here locally and regionally, but I would say even globally. For some of those companies, you probably already heard, but in the years to come, I'm sure that you will hear even more or dozens of more remats or infobits or nanobits from Croatia. Diversification of the economy is one of the critical elements. Many people from outside of Croatia see our economy as very much dependent on the tourism. Tourism is it's a very good, it's a promising and prospective industry. It's supposed to be even more linked towards the other sectors of our economy, so even better vertically integrated, and I would say delivering even better results. But obviously this crisis showed us whenever you have, let's call it, above average level of services and these this kind of activities in your economy, then you are also unfortunately more vulnerable to any kind of events and shocks or exogenous that we are witnessing and seeing. As regards to the earthquake, just a brief again. In Zagreb, a year ago, we had an earthquake 5.2 to 5.5 on Richter. In Petrinja region, that's not far away from Zagreb, 6 plus on Richter, much stronger earthquake. Comparing those two, my message would be as follows. The total estimation of the damage you heard, it's very enormous one, 11.3 billion euros for Zagreb, 5.5 for the Petrinja region. It will take us quite a while. However, these two earthquakes is maybe a good example of showing that sometimes even if the source of the exogenous shock is the same, in this case earthquake, it doesn't mean the same for the recovery. City of Zagreb is our capital. It is and it will be. Downtown of Zagreb, which is predominantly ruined because we are talking about old buildings built before 1960, since when we have a legislation that every single new building which is built is supposed to survive at least 7 degrees on Richter, is damaged. However, it will be reconstructed. It will be again and still is very densely populated. The square meter price for real estate will be and is still the highest. As opposed to Petrinja region, which is even without and before earthquake, one of the economically least developed areas. So for that region, only and pure, just a physical infrastructure reconstruction will not bring the full benefit. We need to make thoroughly plan of reconstruction, both economically and demographically and socially. This is the only way how we can do the proper, let's say, reconstruction after the earthquake in this area of Croatia. So again, linking to our topic of recovery and resilience facility, you always need to dig into deeper. So overall, let's say, focus on investments and reforms is good. It's good for the short term, but obviously in our case, there is a plenty of work looking beyond that in the longer term, which means a proper reconstruction, not including just the physical infrastructure.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Maric. And thank you all to all the panelists. I think we've had some very clear messages coming out of this session about the importance of speed in utilizing these funds and putting the programs and structures in place to make sure that they're well used. So administrative capacity is obviously key to all that, and about the importance of commitment to targets, even in the face of adversity. So we focused a lot on the challenges, which I think is quite right. There's some questions that we didn't get to, Mr. Dijsselbloem's questions about the ECB and future use of these sorts of funds. Is this a one-off or not? But I'm sure we'll come back to those, some of the questions later in the day. But there's a lot of food for thought raised, I think, in this. And in our next session, we'll be looking more closely at the Croatian growth model and how it needs to change. So thanks very much, all of you, for your opening remarks and for participating in this exchange. We really appreciate it. Thank you very much indeed. We'll now be closing for a 5-minute break.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Has this moment changed customer expectations forever? How can you transform at speed to build value that lasts? Are you reframing your future? Or is the future reframing you? In this time of change, find out how we can help you uncover opportunities now, next, and beyond.
Welcome back, everybody. My name's Joan Hoey. I'm the Regional Director for Europe at the Economist Intelligence Unit. This is our Economist virtual event looking at the EU Recovery and Resilience Fund and Croatia's transition and growth outlook. So the session that we're now about to commence is focusing very much on the Croatia's growth model and the reform agenda, and how the recovery and resilience funds can help to maximize the country's growth potential. So I'd like to introduce our three panelists this morning. First of all, we have Alvaro Santos Pereira, who is the Director of the Country Studies Branch in the Economics Department of the OECD. Our second speaker is Elisabetta Campinelli, the Country Manager for Croatia and Slovenia at the World Bank. And our third panelist is Hrvoje Galicic, Advisor to the Management Board at the Croatian Bank for Reconstruction and Development. And finally, Helga Bubanovic Devcic, Associate Partner at EY Croatia. So welcome all of you this morning, and without further ado, I'm going to hand over to our first speaker, who is Alvaro Santos Pereira. Good morning.
Good morning, Joan. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure being here. I will start by doing a small presentation on some of the main indicators that we see regarding Croatia. So if you could share my screen and to share the indicators, and I would appreciate. Basically, one of the issues that we have, next slide, please. Next is really the puzzling idea that Croatia's GDP growth is still a bit lower than it should be, and the question is why. Next slide, please. One of the issues that strikes us is regarding the weak productivity. Productivity has been partly affected certainly by the tourism sector, but a general proposition of the Croatian economy has been weaker productivity than it happens in other Central and Eastern European countries. As you can see, this is OECD countries and Central and Eastern European countries, and Croatia, with the exception of Bulgaria, is the country with the lowest productivity or GDP per hour. Next slide, please. This is also happening in terms of not only in terms of levels, but also in terms of productivity. So usually when you have lower productivity, you should be growing faster in terms of productivity. But this graph shows what has happened in the past few years, and this is not the case. Croatia has been having really sluggish labor productivity growth. So the question is what to do, and this is where the agenda for reform should come. Next slide, please. The COVID crisis has hit Croatia very hard, and it's one of of all the countries that we follow, one of that hit the hardest. But you can also see that the hardest hit countries were the ones that had a very large share of tourism, like Spain, Croatia, Portugal, and Greece. And so it's not a surprise that the COVID crisis has hit Croatia more than in other countries. Next slide, please. So as I said, the big issue is that what to do in terms of policy. First thing, clearly, the best economic policy at the moment is vaccination. There is no question about that. The fastest we have vaccination, the fastest will be the recovery. Certainly, we're starting to see in Israel, which is the country that is with the fastest vaccination rollouts. And you can see that, please, my slides. Thank you very much. This is a big issue. We can talk about vaccination nationalism, which I think is self-defeatist, but certainly the total priority should be right now to vaccinate as fast as we can so that we can recover fast. Otherwise, we will not be able to recover fast. Today, we just saw Germany going back to some of the lockdown procedures, partly because we don't have enough people vaccinated yet. Second, we think that it's very important, until the pandemic subsides, it's very important to maintain fiscal support. The fiscal situation is in relatively good shape compared to other EU countries, so we think this is important to maintain the fiscal support for now. But in terms of transitioning to a high growth and post-COVID economy, we think that part of the discussion, as we just heard, has to do with what type of investments. We can talk about this in the Q&A if you want. But we also think that, more importantly, is to do some reforms. So I'm going to focus on this, on product market reforms and other reforms that Croatia needs, but certainly also other reforms I think could be used or could be seized the opportunity in terms of recovery is reducing state ownership, in particular some sectors that are disproportionately still owned by the public sector. So, we have legacy of the past, and many Central Eastern European countries, we have a participation of the state that is higher than most of the other Western European countries. But still, when we have about 1,000 SOEs still on board, and particularly SOEs in areas like tourism, not only brings risks, because obviously this with COVID, we might have some contingent liabilities there, but more importantly, for productivity, we think this is an area where reform should happen, and also reduces barriers to entry and competition in many sectors, especially in service sectors, and improving the investment climate. Please, next slide. Next slide talks about the overall product market regulation. So this is an OECD indicator that covers more than 60 countries and tries to understand whether the restrictions are high or low. And you can see that Croatia basically is on the average of the OECD. Please, next slide. But significant areas for reform, these two at least. You look at the World Bank doing business, and starting a business in Croatia is still a nightmare, and this is not justifiable. We just heard, I think, was the Deputy Prime Minister saying that the priority would be a single office to start the business and to help enterprise as well. I think this is an area, certainly company registration and licensing, especially registration, is still a nightmare or too complicated in Croatia. It's an area for improvement. The other one is dealing with construction permits. Being in 150th position in the World Bank's doing business shows that something is fundamentally wrong. And so this is an area, in my view, that should be a total priority going forward in terms of reform. Please, next slide. As I said, SOEs play a disproportional role compared to other countries. With the exception of Lithuania, of all the Central and Eastern European countries, Croatia is by far where you have the largest presence of the state. And so this could be a good opportunity for reform during the recovery. If you want to attract and diversify the Croatian economy, a good area to start is to try to identify sectors in which there could be more concessions, then there could be certainly more higher participation for the private sector there, which will bring a lot of investment to the country and create a lot of jobs. So we think this is certainly an area of priority going forward. Next slide, please. Also, regulations in some service sectors. We're talking about here lawyers, notaries, and other type of sectors. We see that some of these regulations the entry are way too strict. So you can see that Croatia for these sectors, retail medicines and lawyers and notaries, scores the worst of all countries we follow. And so this means that competition is highly restricted and regulation is highly restricted. And so an area for reform certainly would be this one, going forward to bring more investment. Next slide, please. And another area that needs to recover and needs to improve is certainly the area of the anti-corruption, and pro-integrity agenda. This is very important, knowing that with the recovery plan, there'll be a lot of new EU funds. And so in order to continue to improve public trust, and especially to improve the effectiveness of all these investments, we think that is an area of concern, and top priority should be exactly to strengthen the institutional framework in the fight against corruption and to promote integrity, so that you don't have problems like other European countries have had with the EU funds related to corruption, and so that you don't waste precious resources at the stage when you badly need them for the recovery. I'll stop for now, and then we can talk about other issues later. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's really useful. Really good to identify what's been holding Croatia back so far, and what we need to do, what needs to be done to address some of these problems. So let me turn to our next panelist. That's Elisabetta Campanelli. Over to you.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Joanne, and thank you also for organizing this absolutely timely event. Just a month before having to submit the National Resilience and Recovery Plan. I think this is really great. And also thank to Alvaro for introducing many of the things that related to the problem with productivity. So I will be able to skip some of those in my introductory remark, although I hope we will be able to also to talk a bit more about SOEs, because I think the situation in Croatia is really quite different, very granular, that we have to look at. So let me say a few things first of all. Indeed, we do see that the model of Croatia is really not only growth is a problem, but resilience, as many of our speakers have also mentioned in the previous panel, right? And the question now is, having had the experience of the the current crisis, but the financial crisis, and how has the economy evolved, and will we be ready to go on for the next opportunities that are in front of us with a new growth model? So far, we have been changing this growth model. The crisis that also Minister Maric has mentioned of the global financial crisis of 2009 did not find Croatia really ready. In fact, the opposite in a way. He had the wrong model being utilized as a small open economy, but not relying mostly on investment in industries, domestic industries, excessive debt. And this really created enormous problem when the financial crisis came. And, it took 10 years, as we heard, for Croatia to recover to pre-2009 2009 growth level. Second, but one thing is that as of 2005, several actions were put together to change this growth model, right? So we had a very important growth of the private sector investment, increase of FDI, and I think the fact that Croatia showed a downward trend on reliance on debt restructuring, very strong fiscal adjustment. The country has been running fiscal surplus, really changed the perception of Croatia. Which, together with the fact that it entered the EU and shows some stability and flexibility, including some reforms that were important and that we saw, though not maybe enough, in the labor market, in the product market. Some restrictions were removed. This really allowed, a real change and solid growth path. But of course, as we heard also from our colleagues from OECD, this wasn't enough. And when the crisis hit, the new crisis, the enormous crisis that we just discussed, we discussed earlier on also with the Prime Minister and the previous speakers, which is, not only the COVID crisis that hit the country, but also the crisis brought by a series of earthquakes in 2020. What we did find is that while the economic model had changed towards a much more sustainable model, still the country was found itself not to be resilient enough, right? So in spite of the diversification towards more experts, in spite of trying to change the over-reliance on tourism, the country, Croatia, is still too exposed to and too vulnerable to external shocks. So going forward, the National Resilience and Recovery Plan, what we heard earlier on, the EU funds, they're all really looking at the right things. We discussed digitalization. We discussed the fact that there will be a shift towards higher productivity sectors, knowledge-based sectors, creating the environment for faster productivity and growth. It's all, if you like, been discussed. But how come then the implementation? Often countries like Croatia, lag behind on the ability to implement many of these reforms, even when they're known, they are identified and they're very clearly spelled out in the National Resilience and Recovery Plan, as well as on the other plans for the reforms and structural reforms. And I think here we have to bring in some other element. First, the biggest element I want to discuss is the issue of institutions. Now, institutions, I think Alvaro could have equally brought us example of where Croatia stands on the quality of institution to show that clearly here also we lag behind on many different areas. It's very difficult to entangle what institutions are, right? But I think maybe we could say that a few elements. One is over reliance of towards the public sector creates problem when you don't have a strong institution. Clearly, a lot has to do I think in this area, in addition to what has been said by others, also to the quality of the judiciary and the fact that public sector administration, there is still still a need to really make a major leap forwards towards improving the quality of public sectors, and the fact also that Croatia has a very in a way decentralized, actually it's a centralized economy, but with a very large number of local governments, many of which really have issues of quality of employees and so on, excessive level of the public sector. So in addition to the issue of identified about state-owned enterprises or which I think we should actually look much more at network industry rather than there is really the presence of the state in some of the public sector is not as excessive as it might look from the big numbers. It's most the efficiency of the network industries, which is really quite different. We need to be looking at how to reform the judiciary, how do we accelerate all the agenda related to some of these governance, public sector governance. I also want to mention two more elements. First of all, in addition to the what has been said on digital and green, which I think it doesn't need to mention anything else, two other areas, in my opinion, are important for Croatia. First, education outcome. We often skip on this one because we know that there is very large access, of course, of participation in the education sector, but the quality of the youth that we produce in Croatia, the quality of the education level that we produce is not sufficient to compete in these new industries. The government will introduce a major reforms of the education sector going forward. We're very hopeful on that, and I think this should continue to be one of the focus. And then the other element I want to also mention is that even though we're talking now only about growth and productivity, is raising growth by itself and the growth potential is not enough if this growth is not inclusive. And we ought to be spending a lot more time and discussion about sharing opportunities equally across different social groups. Part of it, of course, is the protection of the poor, but part of it is really has to do with making sure that we will be able to bring these marginalized communities and these poor, which poverty remains still important in certain areas of Croatia, that we will be able to bring them to the labor market, to include women participation in the labor market, youth, and also to make sure that the lagging region of Croatia, like, for example, the one that was mentioned earlier, that was hit by the earthquake in December, will be able to participate more actively into the Croatian economy. So including growth in addition to looking at the growth potential is also an important element. I stop here and I hope to be able to respond some of the questions later on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elisabetta. So now our third speaker is Hrvoje Galicic. Thanks very much for joining us this morning. I know you had to step in at the last minute. One of your colleagues was not able to join. So over to you.
Yes, hello. Can you hear?
Yes.
Yes. Yes, I had to step
Yes.
in, and it's really nice to see familiar faces. So I welcome all of you, and thank you for inviting us to this really interesting discussion and this really interesting point. I totally agree with Ms. Campanelli. We are at a crucial time in designing certain aspects of Croatian future growth and utilization of the EU funds, not only the Recovery and Resilience Fund, but also the cohesion funds and EU funds in general. Just a first remark about the HBOR for those that are not familiar. So we are Croatian Development and Export Bank and also a Croatian Export Credit Agency. So in that respect, it is in our, I would say, roots to take care about the development, the sustainable development, and take care of the social and economic development of the Croatian market. In the last 12 months, it was really difficult to discuss any topic without remark to the COVID-19 pandemic and the challenges that was brought to us by the COVID-19. But on the other hand, what we want to look in that respect as a HBOR, as a development bank, that this COVID-19 pandemic is not bringing us only the let's say challenges, but also the opportunities for the future growth. I would say the COVID pandemic speed up a little bit, and I think we will all agree about that. Speed up a little bit the question about reshaping the future economic growth model and the future economic growth vision. 1.5 years ago, HBO started with a project of designing a midterm strategy, and this was also the project that was supported by the EU and by the World Bank, etc. And we thank them for that. And within this project, we already recognized that out of 5 pillars that we want to focus on, 2 pillars have to be, in 2 pillars we have to focus on the digitalization, on the green investments, and changing the model of growth here in Croatia. So Mr. Alvaro already said that Croatia market has a relatively low productivity and that we are lacking behind the EU averages and generally the